Let's start with your engagement in nanotechnology, Paul. Can you please explain more what nanotechnology means?
10, 15 years ago, it was theory and research, but a lot of this now is actually reality.
What types of breakthrough can we expect in near future by globalizing enabling technologies?
We can use these technologies to build a fairer, safer, more sustainable future for everyone.
You argue that digital twins can also be used to provide unique information management solutions to the current Covid-19 crisis.
Degenerative diseases are potentially the biggest problem that we now face.
Tiny immune proteins made by alpacas could be the key to new therapies to treat COVID-19.
It's in everything, but we just don't see it because it's so small we can't see it.
It's absolutely fascinating. I didn't have a clue about this.
Hello everyone, welcome back to Excellence Talk. As usual, together with Dr. Christian Forstner, we are welcoming an important guest, this time from UK. Hello Christian.
Hi Murat, good to see you again. Yeah, we are excited to have Paul Stannard here from the UK. He is the chairman of the World Nano Foundation and charity World Science Aid. And since April, Paul, you are partner of the Vector Innovation Fund supporting technology companies which protect the global economy in relation to pandemics and future healthcare, as well as enabling technologies that support sustainability and longevity. You are the highly creative leader with attention to detail, and you help mentor many technology startups that now sit on a global stage. Let's start with your engagement in nanotechnology, Paul. As a physicist, I know that this is about the use of matter on an atomic or molecular scale for industrial purposes. Can you please explain more what nanotechnology means and what the potential is, and maybe by using some examples?
So thank you, Christian. So nanotechnology is a bit like people talk about blockchain and crypto. Ultimately, it's more simple than that. Blockchain is a ledger. It's an audit or a ledger. And in simple terms, nanotechnology is a measure of science. So the term nanotechnology was defined. Scientific research and innovation was limited to a micron, which didn't allow us the flexibility that nanotechnology allowed us. So basically, nanotechnology is lower than a nanometer, and a nanometer is basically a billionth of a meter, or as an analogy that's used quite often, it's 100,000 times smaller than a human hair. And the early things that nanotechnology were used on in industry, 15, 20 years ago, when it was in its infancy commercially, were things like cement to make them, bind more. And so they were used for things to actually enhance existing technologies to make them smarter or faster or more flexible, more conductive or more durable or sustainable or even traceable.
Thank you very much, Paul. It's really interesting. Recently, you published an article in the MIT Technology Review. You argue we can solve the world's biggest problems with smart investment in nano-enabled technologies. Could you please tell us what are the key messages of your article?
Yeah, I've talked on this subject many times, and in reality, what's happening is, the world is building more and more infrastructure, and we're traveling more and more and more, which actually creates more challenges and more problems on our healthcare systems, on our ability to cope with things like the pandemic, and also on sustainability and use of resources. So if you take the UN has stated that because of the growth of urbanization, where more and more people in the world are moving into urban environments out of rural environments to cities, something like 70% of the world's population by 2050 will live in a city or an urban space. And that means we're pushing everything into this decentralized sort of post-industrial model that basically we can't sustain now, let alone in 2050. So 1,000 new cities, it's been forecast that new cities will have to be built so they can be more efficient than these Victorian-based hubs and megacities. And the reality is the only way you can do that, and for our planet and for life to work, is actually if you create a decentralized, digitized and democratized way of using all of this. And effectively, nanotechnology gives us that space where the last industrial revolution, we were able to move about We were able to build things on scale. But what we created was overuse of fossil fuels, pollution, plastic, antimicrobial problems that came about because bacteria is interacting with our movements, and many other challenges such as food poverty. And 2 billion people don't have access still in today's world to clean water, which is actually because of what we've done with the last industrial revolution. And nanotechnology allows us to create that ability to change things so they are smarter, faster, more sustainable, and therefore we can build healthcare systems that are decentralized, digitized, and fairer on society and all the resources that come with that.
It's amazing, isn't it, Paul? You support a collaboration amongst experts with Citizenif, the company that uses digital twins in the global building industry to reduce the CO2 footprint of cities, for instance. Just recently, we had an interview with the chairman and CEO, Michael Jansen, who you know very well. You argue that digital twins can also be used to provide unique information management solutions to the current COVID-19 crisis. Tell us more about this, please.
Yes, we've known Michael for quite a few years now, and the work his company, Citizenif, have been doing. And basically, digital twin technology has the ability to take all of these disparate amounts of data that are used to build an environment and allows us to harness it. So if you take nanotechnology, which is used in sensors, and a bit like in, we've all got our mobile phones now, some health app or Garmin or Fitbit that basically tracks our health or tracks our fitness or how often, that 11,000 steps that we're supposed to have done each day. These nanotechnologies will be able to, in real time via mobile devices, be able to detect whether changes in temperature. So take the COVID crisis that we're in now, or hopefully that we're in the autumn of, we would have been able, if we use these nanosensors and digital twins in the built environment, people would be able to say which parts of the building where there are temperature changes in human interaction. We'd be able to see from those sensors how close people are getting together. So that gives us much more control over these health challenges in the built environment, in the work environment, and also at home, because 70% of the world's healthcare budgets in the developed world is built on a centralized system that basically is very costly. But moreover, the biggest problem it has is that actually most people don't realize this in terms of longevity of human life. It's actually worked in opposite with the ability. So 70% of the budget of our major healthcare systems around the world is spent on end of life. So most of our budget goes in the last 5 weeks of our life being treated for something, which is basically because we built something that is 100 years, and the politicians have to keep fueling. We've got to support our healthcare, but we've got to allow those politicians and investors and industry to create a more decentralized situation where in their homes, you get an alert, or say an elderly person, gets a change in their temperature, or they're not consuming as much air through their lungs, which is related to their immunity. It can highlight these things immediately and tell family and friends or your doctor. It allows us to have that point of care situation. And then in terms of the treatments we can have less invasive treatment. If we take things like paracetamol or ibuprofen, we have to take it in a tablet form, and our stomach is like a furnace. So basically it destroys most of the good, and we have no control of, once it disperses, how much of it is going to go to deal with the pain and how much of it is, like ibuprofen, is going to go to our heart and actually causes problems if we use. Hence why pretty well every drug has only taken under these circumstances and in this amount of time, because we have to control the process. Whereas nanomedicines can use natural things that basically help our immunity and can encase them in a nanoparticle with a homing device. So you only need a speck of that paracetamol, and literally it can be targeted and just go where it needs to go. And then you reduce the amount of materials you need, you actually improve the outcomes. And this is a real game changer. And it's not just healthcare, it's pretty well every industry you can imagine.
It's absolutely fascinating. I didn't have a clue about this, Murat.
Yes, indeed. I think our audience will also amaze with the new ideas, new technologies. Thank you, Paul, for sharing with us. You published another article in Nano, the magazine for small science, 1 week ago. The title is nanobodies could hold clues to new COVID-19 therapies. And the message here is that tiny immune proteins made by alpacas could be the key to new therapies to treat COVID-19. How can that work?
Well, I mean, there are many like those coming through, and obviously the last 12 months, a bit like we saw during World War II, when humanity is in the corner, it has a great resilience at overcoming challenges. And despite some of the problems that we've created for ourselves through the last industrial revolution, these new technologies, whether it's taking a protein or an enzyme from an animal, or whether it's actually taking something from our natural state. So, for instance, I think it was about 30 years ago, an American university did a piece of research and a paper around that we all generate a protein in our bodies that basically fights off immunity. So whether it's fighting off a cold, flu, COVID, cancer, whatever it may be, we have a natural thing that we use in our body that nature takes over. Now, that was found 30 years ago, but in a commercial sense, it was like a chocolate teapot. It had no use because you couldn't do anything with it outside the body. So as we got older and we got into our 50s, we produced less of this. It's called leukemia inhibitor factor. And it's basically, I call it, and the company work call it live for life, because it is the essence of nature and a life. So a Cambridge scientist that we work with has spent most of her career trying to find a way to how can we capture this natural enzyme protein and allow it to good in the world in terms of a health sense. So she's perfected, and she has the global IP for this, of actually taking this LIF and encasing it in a nanoparticle, which is, a tiny speck of a speck. And she puts a tiny speck of this inside this nanoparticle made of soluble stitch. So you're not putting something in the body that is alien. We use that, it's all approved. And then you're just putting that protein back into the body where nature wanted it, creates it. So you're not putting some synthetic material into human, you're putting life and immunity into someone's body. So if you take this particle and then you put an antibody and homing device on it, we can now then have targeted medicines using natural proteins that can go exactly through the stomach undetected because it's so small. It gets past all those antibodies that see these foreign bodies as attack things, as terrorists. And actually it can go undetected calmly through the body and go to where it needs to do good. So taking that LIF example, this particular scientist and company who we are supporting through our Vector Innovation Fund and Pandemic Protection Fund, is she has perfected, and this is the first human science, and she won a global award for this a couple of years ago, where she basically has been able to take that particle with the LIF protein, take it through the body and pass the blood-brain barrier, where it attaches itself to the myelin, which is broken wires in the brain. And this is a non-scientist talking here, so forgive all the academics that might be listening to this. So this is the industrial guy telling the story. But basically, the soluble stitch of the part dissolves, allowing this natural particle to attach it to the damaged myelin. This technology platform had animal trials using mice models where they injected human MS into mice that basically then were attacked by the red blood cells, started attacking the joints and creating pain throughout the body because it can't tell what is good and what is bad. That's what the disease is doing to the human. So it then does it to mice. What they found within 48 hours of administering this nano medicine, that the mice, we've actually got a video of it. It's like something out of a miracle, But basically the mice were riddled beforehand, and 48 hours they were skipping around like young mice, alert. Now, obviously there's a difference in terms of the leap between mice and human beings, but you think about that as a principle, degenerative diseases are potentially the biggest problem that we now face, and we don't have things that can even slow it down, let alone cure it. We've all got family or friends that are going through this, and it's been reported more recently in the news about sporting figures that have been affected by these type of diseases and dementia. If you had a platform technology that put a natural protein in the body and you could do it and you could actually repair the wires in the wire, they get better. Now, if they have 20 or 30% success of that, that means a lot of people that have got these degenerative diseases are going to recover. And it goes further than that. If you can then do that for degenerative diseases, how else else can you encapsulate that lift particle? So we've been talking to the company and the scientists about how you could, so with something like the pandemic and Spanish flu or COVID or flu generally, our lungs basically fill up with liquid, which is then what basically kills us. But as we get older, that's what we can't fight it, because we don't build up enough autoimmune, because nature can't repair itself as well with these proteins. Whereas if you had like an asthma pump that had the lift in it in a nanoparticle form, you would effectively be putting basically immunity back into older people. Now, I'm not saying that particular idea is proven or whatever, but that's the principle. There are so many different applications to nanomedicine that can potentially cure future pandemics, but also things like antimicrobial resistance, another big scourge that could affect the global economy. Another point, if our bodies start rejecting antibiotics, the impact on the economy and on our health systems is as profound as COVID. And one of the global economists, a health professional, did a paper on this a couple of years ago, Jim O'Neill, and basically we worked with that group. And if we start resisting, we're back to Victorian ages of how we deal with healthcare. Now, if you have treatments that basically can, in our water table, our water is full of plastic particles. It's full of bacteria, because everything's got bacteria, right? It's full of antibiotics, because when we take antibiotics, they go in our body, they come out of our body, and they're also being flushed into our water table. We have nanotechnologies based in Europe that have been developed that can not only can create clean water, back to that water poverty thing, which also impacts on health, it impacts on conflicts around the world, because food and water poverty then linked to education are usually the biggest thing that create displacement or wars in the world. So if we can take water, and we can take out individual parts in that water. So if you imagine like it's a nano mesh that's so small, but not only is it a mesh, it can actually recognize which things it wants to take out and which things it wants to leave in. That's incredible. That's absolutely incredible. And other ones are to do with that. There's a company in America that is getting a lot of attention, Nanotech company at the moment, because it's got some quite high profile investors like Bill Gates and Oprah Winfrey, and even the pop singer Katy Perry. I think they're all neighbours, so I think that might have something to do with how that all came about. But that's getting a lot of backing at the moment. And what that does is, I think it's lemons have a certain enzyme in them that basically help them last longer. So these guys have taken that nanotechnology and taken that enzyme, and they found a way of commercializing it. So in places like Africa, where huge proportions of the food doesn't get from the farms to the end user, which in developing countries is a thing they can't afford. And even in the developed world, we can't afford it, because we're using up, all of our biodiversity, because we waste so much food. Much of it's because it's perishable. Now, these guys have developed a technology that actually can take that enzyme and put it into other food types that don't last as long as those that do have that in them. And there's another nanotech center that we work with through the foundation based in Braga in Portugal, where they developed, so when we eat food, the reason we have so much sugar in it and salt is because it sends an impulse to the brain that says, I want more, I want more. So it's telling you to eat more. Whereas they developed like a salt and sugar coating, where they put a tiny nanoparticle of salt with a homing device on it. So it sends that electrical neurological thing straight to the brain saying, you've just ate something tasty. And then effectively your mind only needs to have that impulse in the first few seconds of eating food, and then it's satisfied that what it's eating, they're happy to eat again. And then the rest of the food, apart from the outside, has got no salt, got no sugar in it, and it's basically a trick of the mind. But that could transform how we, food manufacturers and human beings, off of that impulse, because our brain doesn't care once those first few seconds, but it doesn't stop us eating too much, basically. And then it also applies with things like chemotherapies for cancers. So So we have to put so much of that material because we can't target it. If you imagine we were able to put a tiny, tiny nanoparticle of that material and put it to where the cancer is, how much better and what better outcomes, what better life would we have? And this is what we're focused in. And that's why we're committed with what we're doing, whether it's our charity, World Science Aid, to deploy some of these technologies where they're least affordable. So get philanthropy and giving and governments to say, right, okay, we've got a nano cream that basically stops haemophiliacs from bleeding to death, and it costs a few dollars. Now, in the developed world, it costs $100,000 a year to treat 60% of haemophiliacs. Certain African countries, they don't even accept that it exists because most people die at birth. But if you need no refrigeration and you've got a simple cream that costs a few dollars, not $100,000, and a big hospital, and they can rub it in and people can live, then we can use World Science Aid for challenges like that. So I use that one as an example, but obviously water poverty, food poverty, and places where the developed world can't afford their own health systems. So why are we encouraging them to go and repeat our mistakes when we can use these technologies to build a fairer, safer, more sustainable future and creating longevity for everyone?
Paul, that's absolutely amazing and also very encouraging news, I think. I mean, if we listen to you, it sounds like fiction, but I think it's already reality from what you're telling us.
Well, as previously a media owner in my earlier life, when I first started meeting some of these nanotechnology scientists, I was looking at them as if to say, this can't be true, And probably 10, 15 years ago, it was theory and research, but a lot of this now is actually reality, because nanotechnology is pretty well in everything. Sometimes you'll see on the television, these razors that are using nanotechnology blades or whatever as a marketing spin. But the reality is a lot of what we have in our everyday life, the sensors in our phones, it's in everything, but we just don't see it because it's so small we can't see it. But what we are seeing now is what we call nano enablers, like the one with the degenerative disease. That doesn't just enhance something existing, that changes the game. And there's a guy, he's the dean at Southampton University in the UK, and Berners-Lee is famous for inventing the internet, and this guy is the guy that invented the fiber that actually allows us to have the internet, and he's the world's leading figure in that form of nanotechnology. So why? So his team are working on something, because clean energy, solar energy, is getting smarter and smarter because of nanotechnology and the sensors enhancing how much energy it can hold and take from the sun's energy. But you cannot transfer that energy very far from where these solar plants are. And to monetize them, they've got to have 20 years to monetize them. So it's a bit like wind technology, it's getting better and better because of these type nanotechnologies. But we will have a situation before long where they're developing fiber that can go at the speed of light and can take any amount of electricity safely and transfer it at the speed of light anywhere in the world. Now, you can imagine that you could have a solar farm in the Sahara Desert that could generate 2/3 of the world's electricity. So all of these things are about democratizing, decentralizing, and using other complementary technologies to build a faster speed boat. And our principle is money needs to make a profit in some certain, so the investment world, and COVID-19 and the global crisis is woken up a lot of the investment community that we've been speaking to for 5 years. They get very excited about these new technologies, but then it's much easier for them to invest in a building in New York or Manhattan because they're listening to some investment professional who only knows how to sell that solution. He doesn't know anything about nanotechnology. So people go back to their comfortable, safe pair of slippers, but they aren't safe anymore and they're not sustainable. And we're seeing over the last year, and it's been accelerating for 2 or 3 years, but now the world economy can't face another pandemic. It can't face these challenges of, the Paris climate change issues and all of the things we're doing. So we feel World Science Aid is to help those global challenges from a giving point of view, and then give these products that can do the solution to the NGOs to deliver. And then we want to help the industrialized world find these nano enablers that actually change the game, whether it's clean water, healthcare, energy. And actually, we've got a real chance. And maybe one of the things that will come out of what's happened over the last 12 months is that we will build a smarter, more efficient future. And we can actually start addressing some of these challenges that almost look impossible has suddenly become possible.
Paul, the wealth of knowledge you have is just staggering and amazing. But what I appreciate most, and I probably also most of our listeners, is that you are blessed with the ability to explain things very well by using examples. So thank you so much for using all these examples, since I think now we understand much, much better what this is all about. We had a short question on philanthropy and charity, but you already explained how these things are intertwined and how much you're engaged. So I think we are left with a last question that is about globalization of these technologies. Murat?
Yes, indeed. Paul, the key statement on your LinkedIn page is that you are focused on globalization of enabling technologies for a sustainable future. This statement widens the scope beyond nanotechnologies. What types of breakthrough can we expect in near future by globalizing enabling technologies?
Well, I mean, look at transport. We talked earlier about the challenges of all the pollutants and our cities and a built environment. One of a nanotechnology company scientist was doing a talk in America with Elon Musk about his SpaceX technology and about the technology they're using to output and transport people in space and all the satellites that he's putting in. And this scientist had a deep conversation on stage with Elon, and there's not many people that can trade blows with that entrepreneur. And basically it led on to that basically his technology could be replaced in 10, 15 years with moving matter. Now, you know, and it sounds like Star Trek, and probably still is a little bit Star Trek, but it's not beyond reasonable ability that 20, 25 years time, we're all going to build this electric world, which will be sustainable and fantastic, but it may be shortly surpassed by other technologies that are even faster and smarter than the ones. So the next industrial evolution is here and now. And I think COVID, a bit like World War II, is only going to accelerate. The money is going to get smart. Corporations are going to need to know that they can't just use the old models. They've got to change to survive. And I think, you know, governments can't afford what they're promising. So we have to have this productivity, that these emerging technologies, and the next industrial revolution is now and happening over the next 5 years, 10 years, but the one after is no more than 5 or 10 years behind it, not 100 years. And that comes with responsibility as well. And there's a lot of responsibilities because, you know, we've only got to look at fake news and what's going on with what people are saying about vaccines and some of the crazy stuff that's out there. And it's easy to believe some of it on the face value of it. But if we can demonstrate, so where we can bring people together, whether it's through transport technology, energy technology, whether it's decentralizing healthcare, food production, communications like 5G, to 7G, you know, if we have this data in our hands, in our homes, in our life, we will have more enriched life. We will be able to not affect biodiversity. We'll be able to reverse. And these things are here every day. We see these, and that's why we're so excited. And money will get excited about the ideas, but they're not just getting excited now. They can see the route to the commercialization, and that's the bit where it moves from great research into enabling technologies that basically change the face of everything, and it's all interconnected.
Paul, this is all so encouraging that I think right now we are still in the middle of this pandemic as we record this interview in December of 2020. So I guess that many people who listen to this and listen this twice maybe to fully understand what you say, you know, will feel much better, since these are all extremely encouraging news for the near future. Murat, don't you think?
Yes, indeed. It was really a lot of interesting, precious information, knowledge for our audience. And we are sure that enabling technologies will help us for a sustainable, better, and excellent world. Thank you very much, Paul. It was a pleasure to have you in Excellence Talk.
Thank you for inviting me.